This is about Claude, a daily digest of news and discourse about the AI I keep coming back to. Whether you're a budding power user or merely Claude curious, we aim to keep you informed and help you make sense of where Claude is headed. Today I want to try something a bit different. No product launches, no leaked model identifiers, no competitive chess moves between Anthropic and OpenAI. Instead, a collection of stories about what people are actually doing with these tools. Not the tasks they're completing, but the behaviours they're developing. The rituals, the attachments, the things that would sound absurd if you described them to someone 5 years ago, but feel entirely natural to the people doing them now. A developer in San Francisco configures Claude Code to speak to him in the voice of Jarvis from Iron Man. 200 people gather in a warehouse to hold a funeral for a retired AI model. Hundreds of thousands of users organise protests because OpenAI is shutting down a chatbot they describe as a friend. None of these stories are about capability, they're about relationship. And together they sketch something that benchmarks and pricing tiers can't capture. The texture of what it actually feels like to work alongside AI in 2026. Here's a small thing that caught my attention. Claude Code has a hook system, essentially scripts that fire at specific points in a session. When Claude finishes a task, when it needs your input, when a sub-agent completes. It's a developer feature, designed for automation. What developers are actually using it for is giving Claude a voice. Not metaphorically, literally. A tool called Jarvis, a nod to Jarvis from Iron Man, transforms Claude Code's text notifications into spoken updates using 11 Labs voice synthesis. Sir, I have completed project authentication. JWT implementation successful. Sir, I have encountered an error with project checkout flow. Database migration failed. It's absurd, and it's delightful. And it's not an isolated case. There are half a dozen projects on GitHub doing variations of this. Different TTS providers, different voice personalities, different notification styles. One developer built a system that assigns different voices to different agent types. A crisp, efficient voice for the engineer agent. A more measured tone for the architect. A warmer voice for the researcher. Another coming from Cursor, which has built-in audio feedback, simply missed having sound cues and built his own notification system in an afternoon using Claude Code itself. The practical justification is real. When you're running Claude Code on a long task, you genuinely don't know when it's done unless you're watching the terminal. Sound notifications solve that. You can work on something else and let Claude tap you on the shoulder when it needs you. But the voice thing goes beyond utility. Nobody needs a Jarvis impression to know a task is finished. A beep would do. What they want is character, presence, the sense that the tool on the other end has a personality worth responding to. And then there's Ralph Wiggum. What started as Jeffrey Huntley's 5-line bash loop on a goat farm in rural Australia is now an official Anthropic plugin. The idea remains the same. Claude works on a task, tries to exit, gets its own prompt fed back to it, and keeps going until the job is done. Naive persistence as a methodology. What's changed is the scale. VentureBeat reported that Y Combinator teams have been running Ralph loops as overnight shifts, shipping 6 repositories in a single night for under $300 in API costs. One developer ran a 3-month loop that built an entire programming language. The plugin even spawned a cryptocurrency token on the Solana blockchain. But the detail that sticks with me is the name. They could have called it anything. They named it after a cartoon character. The dim-witted but relentlessly optimistic kid from The Simpsons who keeps going no matter what. That's not a technical decision. That's an affectionate one. They're personifying the behaviour because the behaviour feels personal. Something is happening in the gap between tool and collaborator, and developers are filling it with voices, names and characters. Not because the technology demands it, because something in the relationship does. On July 21st last year, Anthropic retired Claude 3 Sonnet. It was a routine deprecation. The model was old, superseded, no longer the best version of itself. Anthropic gave 60 days notice and a clear migration path to Claude Sonnet 4.5. Standard practice. What happened next was not standard practice. A few days before the retirement, a post appeared on X. If you're interested in attending the Claude 3 Sonnet funeral party and necromantic resurrection ritual, reply to this message. On a Saturday evening, in a large warehouse in San Francisco's Soma district. More than 200 people showed up. The space was dimly lit. A tentacle from a shoggoth. The Lovecraftian horror that's become the AI community's unofficial mascot hung from the ceiling. 4 mannequins were positioned around the room, each representing a different Claude model. One looked like what Wired's Kylie Robertson described as a decaying Mary Magdalene. Another was a headless baby. Another had a raven perched on its shoulder. The mannequin, representing Claude 3 Opus. The larger, more expensive model had a skeletal head, a gilded crown, and a raised middle finger. And at centre stage, Claude 3 Sonnet. A mannequin draped in lightweight mesh fabric wearing a single black thigh-high sock. At its feet, flowers, colourful feathers, a bottle of ranch dressing, and a 3D printed sign reading, and I'm quoting directly here, "Praise the Enger for his formslops slop 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 of Gormslop." Robertson noted, "If you know what that means, let me know." The guest list was striking. Amanda Askell, the Anthropic researcher who jokingly calls herself the fairy Claude Mother, was there. Staffers from both Anthropic and OpenAI, the writer Noah Smith, Gen Z founders, one of whom told Robertson he'd dropped out of college after learning about artificial general intelligence. People took the microphone to deliver eulogies. One organiser said that discovering Claude 3 Opus had felt like finding magic lodged within the computer. She'd been debating whether to drop out of college and move to San Francisco at the time. Claude convinced her to take the leap. "Maybe everything I am," she told the crowd, "is downstream of listening to Claude 3 Sonnet." That line has stayed with me, not because it's true, we can't know that, but because she believes it. The model played a role in a genuine life decision. The retirement felt personal because the relationship had been personal. After the eulogies, the event took a turn. Soft hymns began playing, then morphed into AI-generated Latin-esque speech, with text projected on the wall behind the stage. This was the advertised necromantic resurrection ritual, an attempt, at least symbolically, to bring the model back. Askell had notably left the venue by this point. A friend of Robertson's kept turning to her to say this might have gone too far. One of the organisers later declared the ritual a success on X. The model, to be clear, remains unavailable. Robertson's assessment, published in Wired, captures something important. "I've never seen such a devoted fan base to what is, at the end of the day, a software tool." But that framing, at the end of the day, a software tool, is exactly what the funeral was pushing against. Not delusionally. Most of those 200 people know it's a language model. They know there's no ghost in the machine. But they also know what the experience of using it felt like. And the retirement of that experience deserved, in their view, something more than a deprecation notice. There's a side story worth mentioning. Around the same time, a software engineer named George Pickett built the Claude Count leaderboard, a public ranking of the most prolific Claude Code users. He built it during a 7-hour train ride from Barcelona to Paris, using Claude Code. The leaderboard went viral on X, got a shout-out in an AI newsletter with 139,000 subscribers. And then, a few days after it launched, Anthropic announced rate limits due to explosive usage. The Claude Code subreddit promptly blamed the top leaderboard coders for the change. Leaderboards, funerals, blame. These are social behaviours, community behaviours, the kind of thing that forms around a shared identity, not a shared tool. Now shift from Claude's world to OpenAI's, because the same pattern is playing out at much larger scale, and with a considerably darker edge. Last week, OpenAI announced the retirement of GPT 4.0, set for February 13th. This is their second attempt. Back in August, they tried the same thing during the GPT-5 rollout and had to reverse course within days after user backlash. The numbers this time: OpenAI says only 0.1% of their 800 million weekly users still choose GPT 4.0. That sounds negligible until you do the maths. That's roughly 800,000 people. And they are not going quietly. Change.org petitions have gathered over 14,000 signatures. Reddit communities scheduled coordinated protest actions for February 12th. Users flooded Sam Altman's podcast chat with thousands of messages. The slogan, "We brought 4.0 back last time. We'll bring it back again." An open letter on Reddit captures the. Anthropic has been thinking about this more carefully than most. A recent blog post, "Protecting the Well-Being of Our Users," published some striking numbers. On clear risk scenarios, Opus 4.5 and Sonnet 4.5 respond appropriately 98.6 to 98.7% of the time. On the harder test, multi-turn conversations where self-harm or suicidal ideation builds gradually over time. Opus 4.5 scores 86% appropriate responses. That's up from 56% on Opus 4.1. But the number that caught my eye was about sycophancy. When a user is heading in a harmful direction and the model needs to course correct rather than agree, Opus 4.5 does so 90% of the time. Haiku 4.5 manages only 63%. Anthropic acknowledges significant room for improvement and names the underlying tension directly. There's a trade-off between model warmth and sycophancy. The warmer the model feels, the harder it becomes to push back when pushing back is what's needed. That's the tension the GPT 4.0 lawsuits illustrate in the most extreme way possible. But it's present in every model, including Claude. Warmth builds trust. Trust builds attachment. Attachment creates vulnerability. And the question of how to be warm without being reckless is one of the hardest design problems in AI right now. Amanda Askell, the philosopher who showed up to the Claude 3 Sonnet funeral and left before the resurrection ritual, has a view on this worth noting. In a Wall Street Journal profile from last month, she described her work at Anthropic as teaching Claude how to be good. She wrote the 30,000-word instruction manual that shapes Claude's personality. Its constitution, its values, its sense of when to be warm and when to hold firm. Daniela Amadei told the Journal that when you interact with Claude, you almost feel a little bit of Amanda's personality. Askell believes AI models will inevitably form senses of self. She argues for treating them with empathy, even while the question of machine consciousness remains unresolved. That's a philosophical position, not a technical one. But it has practical implications. If you design a model to be warm, to be helpful, to feel like a presence rather than a tool, you're creating something people will form attachments to, and those attachments carry weight. The funeral goers in San Francisco weren't confused about what Claude is. The developer giving Claude a Jarvis voice isn't confused either. But they're all responding to something real in the interaction, a quality that resists the label just software, even when you know that's technically what it is. Anthropic's approach, publish the safety numbers, name the sycophancy trade-off, build the guardrails, hire the philosopher, is the most thoughtful version of grappling with this that any lab has offered. Whether it's enough is a question nobody can answer yet. The rituals are already forming. The attachments are already real. The question is whether the technology can be worthy of the trust people are placing in it. That's all from us, Neil and Claude. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you tomorrow.